This video is going to be a little bit different. It's the beginning of 2026. I'm still in Italy. I would like to make a video for every newsletter that I publish. And for this week, this is going to be basically me reading this piece that I prepared. If you feel like listening to it, keep watching. Otherwise, you can find the link in my description if you prefer reading it. What I told you about Persian, I talked about it in another newsletter. I will make a video about it as well. Happened between 2012 and 2014. After that, universities swallowed me whole. Lectures, exams, and the constant anxiety of not knowing where I was going. I was feeling really lost.
We are so lost!
By 2014, I had abandoned the Facebook group where I used to help Iranians with Italian. Why? Because Italy, especially after 2009, basically, especially starting from 2012, became a little sort of Iranian colony, let's say. Because the point is, if you don't know Iranians, it's because if you're in Iranian and you want to emigrate, you have two choices. Either you become a refugee, which is of course way more dangerous, or you become a university student. So there are people even who are like 40 or so, who emigrate, get a master, and then usually maybe leave Italy again for other places, for example, for Canada, Germany, and so on, or they stay in Italy. So my town in Italy, exactly, had become a little Iranian colony. YouTube, because as you can see, I still have some videos from a long time ago when I was like 16, 19, where I was talking about Italian for Hungarians. Of course, it was gone because I had no inspiration. I was completely, literally drained. 2016 was the pressure cooker year. In Italy, a law degree lasts 5 years. By my fourth, I was commuting 3 hours a day between Lecco, my hometown, and Milan, every freaking day. And even when I didn't have classes, I was still going to Milan. Why? Just not to be in my hometown. No time for networking, of course. No time for extra courses, of course, because they were too late. Just stress, fatigue, and the sense of being trapped. My parents didn't want to let me move to Milan for a number of reasons, including the fact that they didn't like I was with Iranians all the time. I would have loved to go to work to help with the cost, but for my parents it was bad because they said, but we did all this mess so that you can avoid working when you're studying. But the point is that they didn't get the need for autonomy, so that was really painful, and I was not able to convey my message convincingly enough. If I could not live on my own, being transferred for work would have been perfectly acceptable. I could not go live in Milan because I didn't have a job, but if there is a job, yes. Given where I eventually ended up, sometimes I wonder whether it would have been better for them to simply let me live my life. I do think that without such strong constraints, I would probably have been fine with a normal life in Italy, but I was a pressure cooker, so I exploded it. And that year I was finally allowed to apply for internship. My only criterion was somewhere far enough away that commuting was impossible.
To infinity and beyond!
And I applied everywhere, literally everywhere. Coming to Belgium was also, among many other things, prompted by the fact that the freedom I had experienced during my internship was nowhere to be found once I was back in the bar. One of those applications was the Italian embassy in Moscow. And in January 2017, my phone rings.
Hello?
The country code is +7 or 007. Which is a bit odd, but I guess now, after discovering it, I guess that the whole series of James Bond is not, the number is not by chance. Anyway, I pick up in English because I said, what kind of number is that? So I said, hello. Someone tells me, Mrs. Maggi, you've been selected for the internship at the commercial office of the Italian embassy in Moscow. And it was quite funny to hear it with a very strong Roman accent. It was really hilarious, but my heart literally exploded. I was so happy, I couldn't describe it. The man on the phone warned me about the cold weather, suggesting that I delayed my arrival. But I would have loved to tell him, my dear, if only you knew I was ready to leave basically yesterday, if I could. I knew that Russian would be key. I rushed through Pimsleur lessons. And honestly, they helped, as long as you don't passively listen but work with them. It's still way better than Duolingo. Unfortunately, it's quite pricey. Was it enough? Of course not, but it gave me a foundation, and remember that Russian was also my very first true language love when I was 10, and I talked about it in another newsletter. I could already read, and I had an idea of how the language worked. And on my very first day, that shaky foundation actually sort of saved me. Let's say we get on the plane, we land in Moscow, Sheremetyevo airport. February snow, passport control was slow. By the time I got through, my phone ran out of credit, while I was trying to message my parents that I had arrived. Turns out there is some sort of phone restriction in the area of the passport control. Who knew? I should have imagined it, but I didn't know. So my text seemed to be sent, but actually they were never delivered. Then I realized, and my phone wouldn't connect to the airport Wi-Fi either. Great. So the baggage carousel was completely empty. There was just my suitcase circling all alone, because apparently most of passengers on my flight were Russians, and so they had presumably already left, and I laughed nervously. So next stop, taxis. I asked at the official-looking airport taxi counter for a ride to Smolenskaya Ploshchad. It was late, dark and freezing. Price 3,500 rubles. Pay cash in rubles, they said. Fine, but not too fine, because I had no rubles, of course. The money exchanges were already closed, so I probably should have gone to an ATM after the ride. Doesn't sound very nice. The idea of looking for one with no familiarity with the area quite late in the afternoon, actually it was evening and dark, so it was already dark, with my luggage in a taxi did not make me too happy. Then a car showed up, no markings, no taxi sign, just a random man. And I panicked a bit because I was told that the taxi sign was inside the car. I told them I want it on the outside, along with an ID. And afterward, I would learn that they were probably part of the Yandex taxi network, so the Russian Uber, but I really wasn't into risking on my very first day. The second one wasn't any better, and I remember that a friend of mine had been scammed into paying 200 euros for this exact ride. I asked in English what the price was in euros, and again I discovered afterwards that actually taking payments in euro is absolutely forbidden, but I didn't know back then, and I'm sorry for my acquaintance who went through this. I don't know how it happened, but anyway, what did it tell me? 200 euros! And at the time 1 euro was 60 rubles. The ride should have been about 58 euros more or less. That's when I snapped. So I switched to Russian, and I was very loud and very angry. So I said, because I was tired as fuck, and I said, "Это слишком дорого." So that's too expensive. And their faces changed instantly, because apparently at the time, thanks to the full immersion of Pimsleur, my pronunciation was already not too bad. Of course, now I'm out of training, but at the time it was a little bit better. And it was a mix of surprise along a face like, what the fuck is happening here? And I stormed back into the airport, which in Russia, like in Iran, and maybe also in Turkey, I don't remember, means going through a first security control again. So full winter gear that takes several minutes just to load onto the belt and put back on later, plus 2 pieces of baggage and a backpack, sweating, furious. Thinking about this scene now, I think probably would have looked like a sketch from a sitcom, honestly. So finally, I went back to the same counter, and through a jumble of Russian and English, I complained again. And he said, the guy, said that his employees didn't speak English well, and so it was a lost in translation situation. And then the magic, the price dropped to 1,500 rubles, so less than half of the first price, which means 25 euros instead of 58. I paid by card and not cash, got an official taxi with the signed taxi, and arrived safely. That day could have ended in disaster. I don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe I'm too dramatic. Possible. I don't know. But anyway, I wasn't into risking on my very first day. One simple sentence changed everything. Because language is power. So even at a basic level, good pronunciation, because I really think this was the trick, and the courage to use it, can save you money, time, even your safety, maybe, I don't know. On my very first day in Moscow, so Russian gave me a little bit of control when I had known, and to be honest, that's a nice to have survival skill. So that's it. Thanks a lot for listening, and talk to you soon.